Hey everyone, in week 9 we are talking about textual analysis, what the book also calls artifact analysis. It's one of the research methods that I think I'm less concerned about. I think most folks have some familiarity with doing this kind of work in their past, whether through literary criticism or having done some kind of rhetorical analysis, or maybe you've taught rhetorical analysis or literary analysis in a class. You're probably familiar with how to do this stuff. But there's some specific applications that I think are a bit different that I'm going to talk about here today. This week I'm also going to begin a series of videos about different components of the final project in the class. And this week we're going to take a look at literature reviews. But let's get started with textual analysis. There's 3 forms of analysis that are talked about in the book: rhetorical criticism, some of they're calling discourse analysis, and then thematic analysis. I'm going to talk about rhetorical analysis, and I'm going to talk about a cousin of discourse analysis. Thematic analysis, that to me, at least the way that I read it in the textbook, it's pretty similar to rhetorical analysis. It's looking at it from a particular lens or vantage point, and I think that if you just kind of stick with rhetorical analysis and then learn about that method, maybe thematic analysis might be something that's relevant to the work that you do, but probably more likely ideological criticism or some other branch of rhetorical analysis might make a little bit more sense. So I'm going to focus on rhetorical analysis and content analysis, which is a cousin of discourse analysis, which is talked about in the chapter. All right, rhetorical analysis. There's a lot of variety of rhetorical analysis, different methods and techniques that you can use to analyze the rhetoric in a piece of communication, in an artifact. You're probably all familiar with what we call Aristotle's artistic proofs: ethos, pathos, logos. You might have heard of the rhetorical canon. Let's see if I can remember it. Memory is one of them. I usually forget that one, but also invention, arrangement, style, and delivery. Those are your 5 rhetorical canons, or the rhetorical canon. You can kind of break apart an argument on one of those 5 components. But there's also a lot of variety. There's a lot of other ways to go about analyzing the rhetoric in a text. You could take a look at fantasy theme criticism, pentatic criticism, ideological criticism. There's feminist rhetorical criticism. There's a lot of different rhetorical lenses that you can use. We've gotten pretty the ethos, pathos, logos approach. It holds up. It's something that's pretty portable that you can apply to a lot of different kinds of texts. So if you're thinking about doing some kind of rhetorical criticism for your thesis project, I highly recommend, and I'll put it in the supplemental resources for this week, I highly recommend Sonia Foss's Rhetorical Criticism. I think it's in its 5th edition. I think it's published by Waveland Press, and it's pretty comprehensive in kind of explaining the different methods of conducting rhetorical analysis. It definitely has the Neo-Aristotelian approach, which is your ethos, your pathos, your logos, the rhetorical triangle, and all that fun stuff. But it has other really interesting and helpful approaches to taking a look at rhetoric, and some that are a little bit off the beaten path, but could be really cool for a project that you're working on. So Sonia Foss's Rhetorical Criticism, highly recommended. If you're teaching rhetoric, Richard Toy's Rhetoric: A Brief Introduction, super short volume, very helpful, pretty comprehensive given its length. I would check that out as well. It's something that I've copied out for students in the past, and they found it pretty helpful. So rhetorical criticism, I think we kind of get that stuff. I'm not going to say too much else about rhetorical criticism. We'll take a look at the document that we're going to analyze as a class this week. But I did want to say that something that I really like that Blakesley and Fleischer does is that they talk about rhetorical criticism in the context of analyzing analyzing artifacts around the teaching of writing. A lot of the time when we talk and think about rhetorical analysis, it's analyzing a speech, or it's analyzing a music video, or some kind of other cultural artifact, and that's fine. There's a long tradition of that in in rhetorical studies. Dr. Jen Scott wrote an awesome article a few years ago about the vaccine autism controversy. It's really good stuff. I'm a little biased, but it's a really good piece, and it's in that vein of research that we do in the discipline, where you take a rhetorical method and you apply it to an artifact. But rhetorical artifacts are all around us. They're not just those music videos, political speeches and things like that. Rhetorical artifacts are also in our classrooms. Like when students produce a text, they are also trying to persuade us. Sometimes it's give me a grade. Sometimes they're really earnestly trying to make their case about a particular topic. So we see rhetorical artifacts around us all the time. A syllabus is a rhetorical artifact. A prompt is a rhetorical artifact. This video is a rhetorical artifact, and you can apply neo-Aristotelian methods and a range of other rhetorical analysis methods to analyzing artifacts like this, like a syllabus, like a prompt. And I love that Blakesley and Fleischer do that, because to be honest with you, most of the times when I apply rhetorical analysis in the discipline, it's not to analyze a political speech, it's to analyze rhetorical moves that my students make. Let me switch screens here in just a little bit, and we will take a quick look at the sample syllabus that you're going to analyze and do as a practice analysis for this week, and talk just a little bit about how we might go about conducting a rhetorical analysis of that artifact. So here we are in perusal, and we're taking a look at a sample syllabus for a developmental writing course. And I wanted to introduce you all really quickly to developmental writing. It's a subfield within composition and rhetoric, and it's a field that I was a part of for a while when I was directing our developmental writing program. And I just kind of really dig what they're trying to do. Like, they're trying to get underprepared students ready for first year writing, and there's some social justice aspects to it that appeal to me, and I just think these folks do a lot of good work, a lot of unsung work as well. But here's a sample syllabus from the Council of Basic Writing website, and that's a pretty good resource if you want to take a look at a different way that folks have tried to reach out and support underprepared students. The Council of Basic Council of Basic Writing is a great resource. This is a sample syllabus from their website, and we're going to take a look at it in terms of you can choose one of these two methods. You can choose rhetorical analysis, or you can choose to look at it through the lens of content analysis. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about how you might go about looking at a rhetorical analysis. And, if we think about ethos, pathos, and logos, the neo-Aristotelian approach, so you're thinking about how this person that's trying to communicate, Elizabeth Baldridge, is a faculty member, how is she trying to establish credibility? So you can think about credibility and break that down in a few different ways. One is they have practical skill or wisdom. That's one method of demonstrating your credibility. Another method is to show that you have shared values with the audience. And the third is your personal character and the character that you portray to your audience, that it's a character that that audience will find appealing. So if you think about credibility, you might take a look at how the instructor, how she talks about herself. What kind of values is she representing to her potential students? So talks about her goals here. That might be something that you take a look at. The way that she describes the course that she built, you might take a look at that as well. Does she emphasize her credentials? What are the different ways that she goes about to try to establish her credibility with that audience? So that's credibility, ethos. You might also take a look at emotion. What are the different ways that she tries to appeal to emotion in her text? We have some talk here about sanctuary. There might be something in there that you might take a look at. You might also take a look at how fear or guilt or other emotions are used to try to persuade her audience. So here in the attendance section, is there something here that's trying to make students afraid to be or to have some kind of fear of repercussions or consequences if they don't do something that she asks? That might be something to take a look at. Logic. When I teach rhetorical analysis, I notice that students have quite a bit of a tough time with logic, because they get into this trap where they think, well, it's logical to me. And that's not necessarily what the appeal to logic is. An appeal to logic is not formal logic. It's not syllogistic reasoning or anything like that. It's the people that I am trying to persuade, what is a form of reasoning that resonates with them? And is there a form of reasoning that is going to make them more accepting of my argument? So thinking about the kinds of reasoning that Professor Baldridge uses with this syllabus. Is it a contractual thing, like you get this grade for this work? Does it use that kind of logic of transactional relationship between instructor and student? That's a kind of logic, and that's a logic that's very different than we're going to be co-creators of knowledge. That is a very different kind of approach. So thinking about the different logics that might be used there. Not that I think that plural is intentional there. Logics. There's a lot of different choices in how you can go about reasoning something, and this instructor in her short syllabus made rhetorical choices that I might not have, and that might work totally well for her students. So what you all are going to do is to think about, if you choose the rhetorical analysis approach, is to think about how you would apply the lens of rhetoric, and we can go ahead and just use ethos, pathos, logos. How would you apply that to a syllabus? The book also talks about discourse analysis. I'm less familiar with that kind of inquiry. I use content analysis, and I teach content analysis when I teach the senior capstone course in the English and Humanities department here at Shawnee State. It's related to discourse analysis. Discourse analysis, I associate that more with the study of linguistics. Content analysis, it's got a tradition in composition and rhetoric. The supplemental resources for this week, it's going to link you to the textbook that I use when I teach the capstone course in the English and Humanities department, Geisler and Schwartz's Coding Streams of Language, which is actually a very in-depth text. You could use it for a graduate study if you were thinking about using content analysis for a thesis project. You would want to cite Geisler and Schwartz. There are a few criteria that your project needs to meet in order to use content analysis. Like it's just like rhetorical analysis is good for answering some questions. Content analysis is better suited to other kinds of questions. So a content analysis project needs to be one where there's some kind of recurrent phenomena that happens. There's some kind of communication that happens around something that recurs or reoccurs. A syllabus, the practice thing that we're going to do this week, that is something that reoccurs. It's every semester there's going to be a syllabus that comes out. Assignment prompts, student responses to a prompt. That's a recurrent thing that you're taking a look at. How are students responding to that, and what are the different patterns that are involved there? Which takes me to the second criteria. You need to be interested in the patterns that are, like, you don't understand what the patterns are, and you want to use a method to understand what the patterns are in those reoccurring texts that come up. Content analysis is pretty good at that, looking at those underlying patterns. And the third criteria is that you need to have some kind of familiarity with the topic so that you can understand the data. When we use content analysis, we refer to text as data, which is weird for some folks in the humanities, and it kind of leaves some folks scratching their heads a little bit. But yeah, you need to be curious about that pattern, and you need to have some familiarity with the topic so that you can understand the significance of the patterns and the trends that come about. Let's take a look at that sample syllabus, and I'll talk you through what a content analysis project might look at in a artifact like a syllabus. While we're here looking at my screen, I thought I would show you a couple resources that I talked about. One is Rhetorical Criticism, Exploration and Practice. That's that Sonia Foss book. If you're interested in doing some kind of rhetorical analysis for your thesis project, highly recommend that you take a look at this text. It's super helpful. I know I have a copy. I think Dr. Jen Scott has a copy. You can ask us to borrow it if you'd like. Another text, just talked about Coding Streams of Language. It's an open access text, and it's also linked in the supplemental resources for this week. But it's super helpful in doing content analysis, putting together a content analysis project. But let's talk a little bit about what a content analysis project would look like in the in the context of that that syllabus that we're thinking about this week. So we have this sample syllabus here from the Council of Basic Writing, and we want to ask a question and then use content analysis to answer that question. And the kind of question that I think content analysis would look at and would be well suited for is looking at patterns of communication around how faculty describe themselves or how faculty describe students. So a question you might ask could be something like, how do basic writing instructors describe the role of students in their syllabi? Or how do they describe the role of instructors in their syllabi? And what you would do is you would take a look at any time that the instructor refers either to herself using a first person pronoun or talking about the instructor in a third person point of view, and you would find every instance of that and you would put that into some kind of document. I've even used Excel spreadsheets, can be super helpful, but you put it in a document and then you code them, you group them together and identify trends and patterns in those groupings. And I'll show you a little bit about what that looks like here in just a second. So something else you might take a look at is how they describe their academic honesty policies. So the recurrent thing might be you'd have this syllabus and then you'd have like 3 or 4 other syllabi, and you would line up all their academic honesty statements and take a look for patterns and trends in how they describe that academic honesty statement, or something similar to it like a plagiarism policy or something like that. So content analysis is great for taking a look at patterns of communication in texts that are reoccurring. So syllabus is a really good one. When I teach this class to seniors in the English and Humanities department, we sometimes take a look at survey responses or interview responses, and that kind of coding can be super helpful, or the kind of coding that's involved with content analysis can be super helpful in understanding those kinds of responses. But this document here, it would be something like, what are the patterns that we're noticing in the reoccurring things that happen? Like usually in a syllabus, there's an explanation of what a student does and what a faculty member does, and you want to take a look for patterns in that reoccurring text. So typically it would be more than just this one syllabus, but I would, if you choose to do the content analysis approach, choose, one of those questions just as a sample, as an example, how are instructors described? How are teachers described? What kind of resources do instructors provide their students in a syllabi? That would be a good question for a content analysis approach. But let me show you a little bit about what it might look like to do a content analysis for a document like this. So here's what I did, a very quick version of a content analysis, is I looked at, in the first page and a half of that sample syllabus, I took a look for any time that the instructor referred to themselves. So like I was a good tip off there. And one thing about content analysis is that it strives for replicability. So it's a little bit more scientific than I think for some kind of interpretive methods that you might be familiar with. So I looked for all references to first person pronouns, I, possessive pronouns like my, but I also looked at the word the professor, and just like quickly taking a look at this, there's a kind of a pattern here that starts to emerge. It's when the instructor is talking about goal setting and kind of positive things, the first person pronoun is there. So our short-term goal, which is first person plural, she's putting herself with her students. That's kind of an interesting rhetorical choice. Our goal is to do this. And then we got my goal as your instructor. So these are my possessive, I possess these goals. I'm going to help you do this and this and this, and that's all awesome stuff. I will do everything on my end, but you are largely responsible for nurturing our class environment. So also in the first person there. And then we get to this thing that's kind of, it's not a very happy thing to talk about, and a syllabus is not always a very happy document to read. But she's, the writer's saying, you cannot return to a class if you've been disruptive unless you've completed everything, and this is verbatim from the syllabus, task dictated by the professor in a follow-up meeting. So we have first person when we have kind of these more positive things that the writer's talking about, but when we have this something that's a little bit negative, then we have this third person, the professor. And I am guilty of this myself in a syllabus. I will, have like a very happy-go-lucky syllabus, like let's all get along. But when I address, sometimes when I talk about like policies and things that like, we have a job to do here, there's this weird third person thing that comes in. So like, this is not a criticism, but it's kind of an interesting thing that we see sometimes with syllabi. And then we have a first person thing. Although I don't grade directly on attendance, final student grades in my class are closely related to whether the student was in class or not. So what I'm saying is that content analysis is really great at taking a look at a pattern, and a pattern that's kind of observed, that I kind of observed in just taking a look at those first couple pages of that syllabus, is that when the instructor is describing her role in the class and it's a positive thing, the first person pronoun is there. But when it's something that's potentially kind of negative or awkward, then they're doing something else with the pronouns. Either we have the professor is stepping in, which is not that first person, it's a third person thing, or here in this example, the final student grades in my class are closely related to whether the student was in class or not. So we have this kind of passive construction here where it's not her saying, I will grade you based on attendance, or I often fail students because of their poor attendance. We don't have that. We have the student grades is the actor in the second half of that sentence. So there you have it. Rhetorical analysis. And we just had one flavor, the Neo-Aristotelian version. You can use that to take a look at that sample syllabus, or you can try content analysis. And I gave you a start there with the, if your research question is something like, how do instructors describe themselves or their role in a classroom? How do they do that through a syllabus? You can keep going with that and take a look at the rest of the document, or you can take a look at how students are constructed, or look at something else that's used in the syllabus. Or, if you've got a syllabus and you want to compare it to that syllabus, knock yourself out. Compare your plagiarism policy or your academic honesty policy to the one that's in that Council of Basic Writing syllabus. Try something out. Try either the rhetorical analysis method or the content analysis method, and let's see what you come up with. But put your comments in perusal, and share what you learned. Share your interpretation of that syllabus, and I'll add some comments myself. That's it. That's what I wanted to share with you all about that chapter in Blake, or that section of Blakesley and Fleischer. These are important methods that are used in the discipline, and again, they're often used. We often think about them in terms of taking a look at a rhetorical artifact, a music video, a political speech. Those are kind of my bread and butter when I teach. But oftentimes when we're doing research in the discipline, we're applying that rhetorical method to the text that students produce. We're thinking a lot about how students are, how they're trying to persuade and what rhetorical moves they're trying to make, and we use these methods to do that kind of work. That's it for now. Thanks again for your patience, and I hope that this was helpful, and I look forward to talking to you all soon. Bye for now.